Community Theater in Middletown. This is Ed Strother talking with Bill Jennings. The date is August 22nd, 1985, and the time of the afternoon is about 1:20, maybe a minute after 1:21 to be exact. The temperature outside is just absolutely gorgeous. It's in the low 70s, the sun is shining, and we are seated here at my dining room table at 1401 West Ashland. Bill, good to have you with us, and I wish you'd come for lunch, but maybe that's some other time.
All right, we'll make sure.
You can come for the 5:30 supper next Wednesday evening. We wanted to interview you for several reasons, one of which was because you had been a president and numerous other officers in Muncie Civic Theatre. But first of all, let's learn something about you. Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Mishawaka, Indiana,
Right.
a little town up in the northern part of the state. Moved to Muncie in 1953 to go to Ball State, fully expecting that in 3 years I'd get a degree and leave here. Well, I got the degrees, but I've never left.
All right. So you've been here since 53?
So we've been here since 1953.
What was your big thing in high school? What did you like to do more than anything else?
My favorite things to do, be in plays and art.
Do you remember any of the high school plays?
The one I remember the most is Imaginary Play.
Well, they did that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We did that.
Were you playing the role of Orgon?
No.
You're
I
one of the
played
doctors.
Monsieur de Bonfoy.
Okay. I've forgotten. Who was
he? Was the apothecary. I think, if I remember correctly, it's been a while.
So you came in selling a few purges and a few laxatives
That's it, exactly.
and another enema bag. And after graduation, what did you do, Bill?
Went to work at a bank in Mishawaka. Worked at a bank for 4 years. Went into the Army for 2 years. Got married while I was there in Anchorage, Alaska. And got out of the Army. We moved to Muncie.
Now, wait a minute. You got married in Anchorage?
Yes.
How did this happen?
Well, I was engaged to be married when I went into the Army. Couldn't get a leave, and so Dorlis flew up there, and we got married up there.
All right.
And
that's great.
That's what.
Well, good for Dorlis.
Yes.
She didn't want you to get away.
Right.
Quite obviously.
I hope.
And I know that's been a very happy union, the two of you together, and a few children have come as a result of that union.
5 of them.
5.
1 boy and 4 girls.
How old is the oldest one now?
He's 28.
And the youngest?
He's 21.
What is the oldest doing?
The oldest is an engineer in Baltimore, Maryland for the Lord Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
He's really a sales engineer. He sells parts to aircraft industries.
And the youngest?
Is a senior at Ball State.
Majoring in?
Accounting.
Good. Well, I know that you weren't always up there in Anchorage, Alaska, that you did come back to Delaware County, and that you were a teacher in one of the county schools. What? No, it wasn't a county.
No, it was over in Anderson, at Madison Heights High School in Anderson, Indiana.
And you taught what there?
Sociology and speech for 17 years.
And you directed plays?
And directed the plays there.
For 17 years?
No, about 15 out of the 17. I think the first year I didn't, and the last year I taught I didn't.
I like to play the game of memorable experiences. When you think of your high school theater days, what was the most memorable experience in those high school plays?
We did a play, The Man Who Came to Dinner. And we had to build Roach City. And as kids will do, I remember my buddy and I going to restaurants and asking if we could get their cockroaches. The restaurants didn't like it too well. But we did get some.
Yeah.
And I remember that in high school. Of course, in college, I didn't do plays.
When you built Roach City, you had real roaches.
Yes, we put real roaches in it. We thought you had to.
Well, this was reality. You really went in for that.
Oh, yes.
Well, how about over at Madison Heights? What was the most memorable experience there?
This is terrible. We were doing, I can't think of the name of the show now. It's terrible. I can think of the sequel with Bells on Their Toes. Cheaper by the Dozen. We were doing Cheaper by the Dozen, and we had to do the plays in the gym. The stage, was an afterthought that they stuck on at the end of the gymnasium. And we thought that everybody was gone. And to get up on the stage, you either had to go through the girl side or the boy side. And I sent this girl, I says, you just go through there and get up on stage. And when she opened the door, there stood one of the coaches stark naked. And she starts crying. And I didn't know what was going on until I found out then. And she was all upset. It took us an hour to get things back to order and get to rehearsals.
Well, did you get a letter from the parents?
No, I had a funny principal, though. He was always there when we did the plays. Never during rehearsals or anything. He didn't bother me at all. But he'd always be there. He would watch the opening scene of the play. Then he'd disappear. He really didn't like plays. And then he'd be there to hear the ending, the applause at the end. And that would be it. But one time we were doing a play in which it was a satire on Westerns. And we had this barroom scene like from Gunsmoke, you know, that type of thing. And Miss Kitty came in and asked the cowboy if she could do something for him. And he asked for a glass of milk. But our principal was very straight-laced. Next day, he says, Bill, I got a phone call last night after the play, and a parent objected to that line in there where that girl asked if she could do something for the cowboy. Of course, he would do this quite often. He would make up phone calls. And we knew this. Whenever you asked for the parent's name, you never got it. So it was never anything to worry about, though.
Well, that's the way Aristotle was a good many centuries ago. And he says, when you want to say something unpleasant, blame it on an absent third party. I have heard it said, or someone told me that, or I had a telephone call.
Well, Bob did it.
And,
but that was his worst fault as far as I was concerned.
Well, somewhere along the way you became involved with Muncie Civic. Now, do you recall in what year or your first experience with Muncie Civic?
The play was Anti-Maine. And I picked up the newspaper and saw they were having tryouts for Anti-Maine, and I looked at my wife and I says, as many men as there are in that play, I might stand a chance. And I had read the play. And I thought, well, the banker, Mr. Babcock. And the only reason I thought that, to be honest, was that's my wife's maiden name. And so I thought, gee, I've been a banker. Babcock sounds familiar. I'll try out for that. Well, I didn't get Babcock, but I got into the play, and that was my first experience, and I think that was probably 1960 or 61 that they did Anti-Maine.
Were they still in Masonic?
No, it was their second year. No, it was one of the last plays of their first year, I think, in Civic Theatre, as we know it now.
I think that first year was 61, 62 season.
So
I'm not
that
sure.
Was it.
Don't hold me responsible for those
I don't remember the years exactly either, but it was early 60s.
Think of that production for a moment. And I know you must remember some good times.
Oh, yes, that was fun.
Now, among the good times, is there any particular little incident that you can recall in Anti-Maine?
In the scene where she's working as the sales clerk.
Yes, on roller skates.
Yes. There, I was a customer who came in to the scene, and this Mary Jo Vermillion was the girl's name. She's moved away from Muncie a long time ago. But she was to get angry and grab a hold of my lapels. And every night she'd miss the lapels, but get every hair on my chest and pull. And she was a big gal, and I was smaller in those days, and she could lift me off the floor, which she did every night. And hurt, I'd leave that scene. She pulled every hair out of my chest that there wasn't there.
Well, Dorlis must have said, why don't you quit? You said what? And get on a show business?
Right.
Well, that's good.
No, it was great fun.
Now, what is the chronology from that point on? If Anti-Maine was the first show, where did you go from there? Were you in another and another show?
Oh, that at the beginning, after I once started, I thought I had to be in every show that Civic did. And it seemed like that I did work for a while on every show, either in it, backstage, or someplace.
Well, that's the way I remember it.
And this is, was the way you got started. And I think that continued for about 20-some years before I slowed down.
You know, they ought to give a medal to people who have 20 years or more. It either ought to be a Civic Theater Hall of Fame, or I would call it the Committee of Great Merit, if you've put in that many years, and if you have served in as many offices as you have served. And speaking of offices, I suppose the most austere and the most imperial office you held was the office of President of the Board.
Oh, yes. And I had only been on the board 1 year when I was elected president then.
That's rather unusual.
Which came as a shock, to be honest with you, because I went to the meeting that night not having any idea I was going to wind up being president. And all of a sudden, I think it was Joy Saunderson nominated me for president, and I was elected. And that was the year that Muncie turned off the steam heat. We used to have steam heat downtown, and this theater was heated with steam heat. So we had to get a new furnace fast.
You know, you're the first person ever to mention steam heat supplied by the city of Muncie.
Right.
But that's a real historical event.
They turned it off that year, and so Civic had to do something, and that's when we had to build the little furnace room that we have downstairs right outside the makeup room.
Mm-hmm.
We had to build that at that time. And so while we were doing that, we also revamped the balcony.
Now, wait a minute. This is when you were president.
This was the year I was president.
Now, do you have any recollection at all as to the cost of that boiler room or that steam heat? That's really taxing.
I know it is, but I think, to be honest with you, it was only $5,000 or something like that to build that room and everything, which at that time, of course, was a lot of money.
Yes,
I mean,
but by today's money, that's really quite inexpensive.
Right.
But we're still worrying about that boiler.
Yes, they still are.
Someone told me that the two things Civic Theater worried about was the Constitution and the boiler.
Constantly, the Constitution was constantly being revised and rewritten.
Well, that's why every year the president appoints a Constitution Committee to look out for it and see if it needs any kind of revision.
But we revamped the balcony, too, that year. Because the balcony, the rows were so close that people could not sit up there comfortably.
Unless you were a little person.
Right, extremely little. And so we removed, I think, 5 rows from the balcony. And then moved the other rows so that there was more space between the rows and people enjoyed it more.
Mm-hmm. These, I dare say, then, are the most memorable experiences.
Yes.
But you have mentioned one name. I think you mentioned the name of Joyce Saunderson.
Right.
Now, other people that you worked with, other people who were very helpful.
All right, on the board at that first year, Helen Schilling was in charge of the box office and did a tremendous job, as she always did in anything that she decided to do. Betty Henshaw was on the board. Tracy Cogswell, whose husband was a professor at Ball State, and met Tracy when she was in Auntie Mame. She played Vera Charles. And I believe she was on the board that year also. Mm-hmm. Dark hair, striking lady.
Yes. And quite outspoken.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Energetic, a lot of fun.
Right.
And that's very good. Well,
Helen Myers, of course, was maybe not on the board at that time, but she was still active, very active.
She was so ubiquitous that you always assumed she was on the
yes,
board.
Yes, that's it exactly.
And she was always so very, very cooperative in any kind of endeavor there.
I remember also, if I think it's the same year, I was going to, well, we called them producers in those days. I was going to be the producer of one of the shows, and instead had to have my appendix removed, and Chuck Van Camp took over and did the show for me.
Chuck was a good worker.
Oh, yes.
And he, too, became president.
Yes.
During that period of time, Chuck and Dick Sandoval. Now, let's think also of another office you held. I know you were treasurer.
Yes, and I was trying to think how many years I was treasurer of Civic Theater. It seems like at least probably 7 or 8 years that
Did you begin, were you in this office before you became a banker with Industrial Trust?
No, because I became a banker with Industrial Trust the first year I was teaching.
Oh.
That summer, teachers didn't have a job, so the only thing I knew to do was banking.
Yeah.
And so...
Hey, how you doing, old buddy? How you doing? I've been asking about you.
We've got a little interruption on our tape
Oh,
here.
I'm sorry. I didn't know you had tape.
So we'll continue while young Eric sits off to one side and keeps his mouth shut. But you had a summertime job.
Right. I went to work in 1957 at the bank. Worked there every summer for them and would take people's places when they'd go on vacation.
Yeah.
And then in 73, quit teaching and went to the bank full-time.
Well, people on the board realized that you were a very reliable person in dealing with money and records.
Hope so.
So you were
but
treasurer?
It was so much simpler then than it is now.
Yeah. When you're a treasurer, does that also mean you pay the bills, or do you have to hold another office to pay the bills?
No. At that time, we paid the bills. The treasurer paid the bills with the president. The two of them worked together because both had to sign the checks before they were negotiable. And so you paid all the bills, and really you were the business manager, so to speak, of the theater.
Mm-hmm.
Because...
and did you submit treasurer's reports for each board meeting?
Had to do that at every month.
Were you ever really concerned about the status of the treasury?
Oh, yes. There would be times when I would wonder, where's the money going to come from? Because we're going to have these bills, and...
well, where did it come?
We weren't always the most affluent organization in the city of Muncie, but somehow we always managed to make it through donations of individuals or through a successful show that brought us in a little more money.
Mm-hmm.
But we had money in reserve, but back in those days, the board of directors was very, very conservative and very tight with money. And although we had a savings account, we didn't want to dip into that and drain it immediately. Mm-hmm. Now, there came times when we had to borrow money. When we did the revamping of the balcony and the boiler room, we had to borrow from
I would imagine.
Merchants National Bank, I think we borrowed that from.
Not Industrial
Not
Trust.
Industrial Trust, no.
Now, also, I know that you were a director of at Civic.
Right.
Now, what did you direct?
The first show was Absence of a Cello. And then...
Who was in that? Who had the lead? Do you recall?
Judy Schroeder was in it, but she didn't have the lead. Oh dear, and I can see the people very clearly, and Judy's the only one of that cast who still lives in Muncie. Mildred Llewellyn.
Was she in
Her
it?
only show, as far as I know, that she did in Civic Theatre was in Absence of a Cello. And she lives in Florida now. Mildred Ianazzo.
Mm-hmm.
She's remarried.
Mm-hmm.
And it was her only show that she did. And I can remember the reviews said that she stole the show from everybody else.
Well, when you think of the shows you directed, that is the one you mentioned first. Is that the one you remember best?
Well, not necessarily the one I remember best. It was probably the best of the ones that I did, I think, partially because of the cast. I remember Dorothea Bunk wrote the review. And, of course, swelled my ego a little because she said I outdid the professional show that came to Emmons with Hans Conried.
Yeah.
And that made me feel good.
Oh, I don't doubt.
Pat Kearns, I think was his name.
Pat Kearns.
Kearns. That was, he had the lead.
Ball Corporation.
Right. He had the lead in the
And
show.
he was good.
Yes, he
That
was very good. In
good.
fact, it was his first show he said he ever did.
Well, I think in his late years, Pat is now deceased, as I
Right.
recall,
Right. Uh-huh.
that he was on the dinner theater circuit out in California.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
That he became so enamored of this that he really gave up industrial life
Oh, yeah, I
and
didn't
became
know
a
that.
professional performer out
Well, yes.
in the dinner theater
Uh-huh.
circuit.
He was very, very good in this
Yes.
role. Uh-huh.
Now, another thing that you did was to work with the Young Actors Workshop.
Mm-hmm. Which you
And-
started.
Well,
Really?
I started it, but you have to count on people carrying it on, and you were very reliable during that period of time.
It was delightful.
Yeah. But tell us about that. For example, right now there is a question as to what should constitute Young Actors Workshop, when they should rehearse, who should do it, how many shows, and what have you.
Well,
So let me ask you.
okay.
We have a horn here that somebody is asking for young Eric, and I think it's his dad. Goodbye, Eric.
I know that he.
Well, we're back after that little interruption. I forgot where we were.
Oh, Young Actors
yes.
Workshop.
Right now, for example, we need to know when to rehearse. Now, when did you rehearse?
We always had our meetings on Saturdays, and we would start at 9 o'clock in the morning with the little group. By little, I mean 4-year-olds up through 3rd grade, I think I took together at that time. And then we had another group from 4th grade through 7th grade. And then we had another group that was 8th grade through high school.
You would break up Saturday morning into
Right.
3 periods.
Right.
Each period was about how long?
With the little children, it was an hour. With that next group, we did it an hour and a half. And with the older group, we did 2 hours. And
So that made you adjourn at what time? 12:30?
sometime in the afternoon.
Oh, good.
We never really paid too much attention to time, to tell you the truth. The kids seemed to enjoy it. And at that time, we tried to do 2 to 3 shows for the schools, where the schools would come to the theater. And then
That's 2 to 3 per year.
yes, per year, right. And then we would always do, each group would do 1 show at the end of the year, which was usually in May, after the end of Civic's regular season, primarily for Mother and Dad, Grandma and Grandpa. We didn't charge any admission or anything for that. It was just to show the parents and their family what the kids were doing. Like, I remember one time with the little ones, 4-year-olds and such, that we did a little play that I found somewhere, I don't even remember where, called 3 Little Kittens, about the nursery rhyme. And some of those children who were in that now are in seniors in high school.
Wait a minute.
So it seems funny to me that they would be that old, but they are.
I know
And-
one of the young actors I worked with some years ago, I watched graduate from college.
Oh, dear.
So time does
I
go
don't
on and
think
people
I
do
have.
grow up.
Now, I didn't direct every show that we did. We had other directors. Nancy Krause, for instance, did The Wizard of Oz.
I remember
there.
that. Fine production.
Yes,
Oh,
it
my,
was.
that was good.
Rehearsals would a lot of times be up in what we used to call the boardroom. We would have the rehearsals up there, and we would have them early in the evening before the main stage productions were going to start their rehearsal. So we'd try to be out of the way when the adults came down to do their plays. And Saturdays and Sundays, we rehearsed. And you really had a lot of cooperation from the parents.
Yes.
They were very, very cooperative with it and wanting their children to do this.
Well, when it comes to children, parents are quite helpful.
Oh, yes, yeah.
You can't get along
can't
without
get
it.
along without them. It's true. But we had some flops. I remember one that was terrible. We did a version of the Christmas Carol, and it was terrible.
Just
It just did not come off at all. But then we did some delightful things, too. And
Sure.
it was really an enjoyable time.
Well, we have about a minute left, Bill. Is there anything I've left out? Have I failed to ask a question that you wish I had asked?
No, I can't think of anything.
You think that pretty well does it?
I think you pretty well covered what I've done at City.
Well, I do want to say that your name came up at a board meeting last night, and it came up out of feelings of gratitude and indebtedness, especially with reference to keeping books and with Young Actors Workshop. And especially because right now, Young Actors Workshop has some very critical questions before it. Well, let me take a minute here to sign off. This is Ed Strother for Community Theater in Middletown, And I've been talking with Bill Jennings today on August 22nd, 1985, and it's still a very pleasant day.